we'll get started with this. Yeah, like Cindy mentioned in that little wonderful intro that she gave me, I've been working with the Allensworth Progressive Association in trying to farm in the Central Valley, all in the effort to create a sustainable agri-food system in Allensworth. So moving right along, if I can. This is just a little roadmap to get you guys understanding on what we're going to be talking about. We'll start with a little introduction into Allensworth, some background on when, why, and how it was founded, kind of what happened to the township, and then a little bit of info into the Allensworth Progressive Association, or the APA, as I'm going to be calling them for the rest of the presentation, and kind of their missions, their goals, and what the APA is here for. From there on, we'll be outlining my capacity building goals for this past term, and highlighted through three of these projects that I kind of think are really good representations of fulfilling these capacity building goals. And then we'll move on to some of the successes and struggles that we experienced throughout the term. So what is Allensworth? Where is it, first of all? That's, I'm sure, a question in everybody's mind. Allensworth is located here in the Central Valley, about 30 to 45 minutes north of Bakersfield, and it was founded in 1908 by Colonel Allen Allensworth, also a Kentucky boy, but that's neither here nor there. It was the first Black financed, owned, operated, and really just run township in California, which is really something special. It was located on the banks of the historic Tulare Lake, which was once the largest lake west of the Mississippi. And Colonel Allen Allensworth, while he was founding this, him and his partners kind of visioned Allensworth to be a center for innovation and prosperity through agriculture, where all could thrive without fear of oppression. So, what exactly happened to this grand scheme that Allensworth thought up? Unfortunately, systemic racism did cause setbacks for the township. In the economic side of it, several branch lines were added to the railway systems that purposefully bypassed Allensworth, restricting vital commerce access. So that was kind of the start of some of the economic downfall of Allensworth. And then in addition to that, some of the environmental concerns that were prevalent then and still to this day include a lot of water rights stuff. So neglect and exclusion of water rights, broken contracts with the counties, and contamination of the water and soil systems have really left Allensworth kind of barren and destitute. Around the start of the Second World War, a little bit before that, Allensworth was kind of a hopping place. And then around the start of the Second World War, that's when a lot of the residents started to move into the cities to get jobs in factories. And that was really the kind of turning point for the decline of Allensworth as a populace. Today, about 600 residents populate Allensworth, mostly Latinx farm workers, and food security is still extremely prevalent. We are in a food desert, with the nearest grocery store being anywhere from 15 to 20 miles away. And because of all this, residents are kind of left without knowledge-based services and the necessary infrastructure to really revitalize this town. So a lot of problems, a lot of historical issues with Allensworth, and that is thankfully where the Allensworth Progressive Association, or the APA, comes in. I love this photo. This is so cute. This is from our fall festival that we held in November of 2023, which I'll get a little bit more into later. But what is the APA? The APA is a 501c nonprofit, and the farm team, which is the kind of umbrella I'm a part of within the APA, was founded in 2006 with the purpose of developing a regenerative, agriculturally based economic engine for the residents of Allensworth, and become kind of a model of agricultural economic resilience for communities of color, not only within the region or only within the state, but really across the country. So a lot of really kind of lofty ideas for the farm team. And some of the goals for the APA as well as the farm team is to foster education through regenerative agriculture, provide farmer training and land access to beginning BIPOC farmers. We also wanted to cultivate affordable and ecological housing developments for more of the residents, so that we can get some more of that commerce and economic interest into the town. And then, of course, to support agricultural and environmental innovation through all of the projects that the Allensworth Progressive Association is going to be doing in the next 5 years or so. So now that we know a little bit about the APA, what Allensworth is, how the APA has come into this, and what are the broad goals of the APA and the farm team, I kind of wanted to talk about how my capacity goals kind of melded into their goals. So the biggest thing that I wanted to do coming in was to create a farm plan based on community-driven interest on what to grow, So what kind of things that they generally like to see growing in farms that are going to be around Allensworth, and then as well as the feasibility of growing these crops. So that includes like, can we actually even grow in this kind of climate and temperature? But also looking at things like market interest, demand, processing interests, and we'll go a lot more into that in a little bit. My second goal was to actually start farming, start to work with the land, try to figure out ways to remediate the kind of depleted soils in and around the valley and specifically in this region. And then, of course, can't ignore it is the community engagement, making sure we can continue to educate and inform the community about what we are doing here at the APA, specifically what the farm team is doing with the farm that we created, and try to create meaningful connections with residents through education. And these are just some lovely pictures of uh, me doing some of that work, but we'll go a little bit more into each of these projects individually. And the first one I'd want to talk about is the crop feasibility study. And that was the first kind of big project that I was put on. If you guys were around for some of the cohort here was around for my January presentation for the cohort, I went really, really in depth into what a feasibility study is, and I'll just kind of briefly gloss over it here. So essentially, we're trying to figure out what kind of crops that we want to have growing at the farm. The biggest thing that we wanted to do was interview a lot of residents to see what kind of things that they buy whenever they go to grocery stores, what things that they're growing in their own gardens, what vegetables they would like to see in the eventual full-scale farm. Um, there was a lot of deciding factors whenever we were making this study. So, like I said, the community determined crop portfolio. We also wanted to look at the physical limitations, and that's what's pictured right here. All of these different crops are ones that we got from the community determined portfolio, and each of these columns are just addressing some of these physical limitations. So, salinity tolerances, climate tolerances, how tolerant are they going to be to extreme drought events? And that's kind of what this is picturing here. In addition to physical limitations and the community determined portfolio, we needed to look at the market risk and production and processing risks of all these. And all of that information is really going to culminate in this overall feasibility matrix. If I can move on. And the results of this feasibility study was pretty good. We landed on a total of 8 crops to plant. Just a little bit of an aside, this this sheet right over here is outlining some of those market access risks. So we were looking at if these are going to be really wanted in some of the local markets within the valley, if these vegetables are really only going to be popular and sellable in places like LA or in the Central Coast or up in the Bay, then there's another risk associated with those. But all of this culminated into us landing on to a total of 8 crops to plant for this farm: corn, beans, cowpeas, a couple different kinds of peppers, okra, eggplant, cucumber, and melon. All of that was included, and I'll be sure to show you guys a whole lot about the farm. And then the other thing about this feasibility study is it gave us a detailed projection of potential profits and losses for the next 10 years. So, which is going to be really, really helpful for the APA long term whenever they're finding out the financial viability of a full-scale farm. So that was a lot of kind of background work with interviewing and talking and getting to know residents, but then a lot of desk research, figuring out different kinds of risks associated with all of these crops. And that's kind of how we narrowed down from this huge list to just 8 plants. The second big project, and probably the kind of bulk of my time this whole year, was spent on developing this, what I call the Allensworth Agricultural Experiment Station, or the AAES. We use this naming scheme because we were kind of inspired by the work that George Washington Carver did with the Tuskegee Agricultural Experiment Station. His focus was also along the lines of growing food for people, but then experimenting with different soil building techniques. So we really liked his ideas, and we kind of just yoinked that name. Um, and the 3 main objectives of this project were, again, to grow food for the residents of Allensworth, to experiment with alternative gardening and soil building practices to see what kinds of different ways we can remediate and regenerate the soil. And then we also wanted to continue to educate and inform the residents on the regenerative practices that were occurring on the farm. Um, so like I said, this was really a bulk of my service term here. This is where a lot of I mean, truth be told, blood, sweat, and tears went into my time here at Allensworth. And I'm gonna take you guys try to be as brief as possible, but take you guys through some of the procedures that I had to go through in implementing this place. So the first and foremost thing we wanted to do was test existing soil to see if things could just grow in the native soil, if we actually had to put any implements in it, if we had to do anything to remediate it, or if we can just get started on planting and growing. We tested the soil. That's a picture of me taking cores, and I didn't want to share the actual soil tests that we got in because, truth be told, I'm still kind of a beginner in assessing these soil tests. We used a soil consultant from Understanding Ag. He was really, really helpful in reading to us the soil tests. And at the end all be all, he essentially told us that our soils are very, very high pH. Like I'm talking 9.5 when you got into like 6 to 12 inches in depth. Very, very low nutrient levels and essentially no microbial activity that was evident by super low soil respiration rates. And despite the actual the latent seed bed that you can see in this picture, the organic matter was shockingly low in the actual soil. So that was a big indicator that we really did kind of need to import soils and get some compost in here, if we wanted to grow anything at all. So that's what we did. Now that we knew that we were going to have to spend quite a bit of money on soil and compost, I thought the best kind of most natural way to transition from that was to create a budget for the project with 4 functional categories. This was an entirely new thing for me. I've never created a budget. I've never really like thought about some of the intricacies of this. And that was a really good learning experience for me because dividing it into 4 functional categories really helped us figure out, okay, we got everything we need for each of these things. We're getting all of our ducks in a row. This was one of the first projects that the APA spent quite a bit of money on, so I wanted to make sure we were getting it right. The 4 functional categories were crops. Of course, those were based off the feasibility study that we just talked about. We got all of our seeds and seedlings from a local nursery called Agape in Delano, and they were super, super helpful. They also had a cat that I almost adopted. And then the next functional category was tools. Now, this included general farming and gardening materials, but it also included some more expensive implements for the BCS tractor that we had. We needed some kind of larger equipment to actually shape and ready the beds. The next category was irrigation. Now, we wanted to create a closed loop with lots of room for error and maintenance because we wanted to avoid downstream pressure issues. As you guys may know, water in the Central Valley is a very, very um, sought after resource, for lack of a better word. It's a very scarce resource, truth be told. And we wanted to make sure that all the water that we were using was we made sure that we were really thinking very intentionally about how we were using this. Um, the last category, and by far the most expensive category, was all of the soil building materials we wanted to buy. So all of the compost, biochar, wood chips, hay, topsoil, cardboard, all of that needed to be accounted for and we needed to get proper budgeted items and line items for that. This was actually also an audit year for the APA. So whenever I was creating this budget, I was working very closely with our director of operations just to make sure I was doing everything right. Again, this is my first time creating a budget, especially this big. So I wanted to make sure whatever I was showing to the APA and all these stakeholders, I was getting all the things right. After we have all of the things and pushing through and talking with vendors and getting everything ordered, the next step in creating the AAES was just prepping the site. So the first thing we did was imported about 80 yards of cubic soil and I think 50 cubic yards of compost. There's a picture of me pretending like I know how to use a BCS tractor, and that's a bed shaper that we used just to kind of build the beds and then layer in the compost. So that took up about a week of my time, and that was definitely a learning experience, something that I've never done before, but it was a lot of fun. The next thing that we did, and I collaborated with a landscape architect at the time. She was a student. Now she just got her master's. We collaborated to create this crop plan that involved a lot of intercropping to achieve best yields and facilitate beneficial biological interactions. And then the last thing to prep the site was to lay the irrigation. So this is actually sideways, but if you guys can take a look at this plan, this design that Nina helped me develop, all of the green rows were the actual crop rows. The brown rows was where we were intercropping beneficial wildflower or native wildflowers to attract more beneficial insects to the site. And then all of this white space all around it was that closed loop of irrigation. So each of these can have their own line dedicated. And then there was a lot of room to add more lines to specific crops if they looked a little bit more thirsty. And then while that's covering the food side of things, this little corner down here is where we were doing the soil building and experimenting stuff. So going from top left and reading like a book, this is the sheet mulching experiment where we were layering cardboard, biochar, mulch, compost. I can't even remember all the things we did, but it was just a sheet layering experiment where we were putting down a lot of organic material on top of the soil, watering it, and hoping that the soil microbes that are already there are going to be decomposing and adding more organic matter to the soil, because that was a big point of concern for us. The next experimental area right here are the compost pits. This was one of Nina's ideas where she wanted to dig about waist deep compost pits, fill them in with food scraps, and then throw mulch on them to kind of get them decomposing and integrating into the soil, again, to add organic matter. But in this specific case, we wanted to see if there was any change in nitrogen and phosphorus levels as we were integrating this compost. Those are still all ongoing experiments, so we probably won't be testing the soils in there for another at least 4 or 5 months or so. So those are still ongoing experiments. We're still seeing decomposition phases and all of that, but it's really exciting to see. This last two right here, this is just a simple wild or a native plant bed. We wanted to see if or at all native plants would grow well in the soil that we haven't amended at all. And actually, they're doing really well right now. And then this last one right here is a hugelkultur. This is again one of Nina's designs that I've never experimented with a hugelkultur, but we'll see more of this in detail whenever we get further in the presentation. How am I doing on time? Okay. Now, moving on, once we had the entire site ready, we could just go ahead and get planting. For direct seeding, we direct seeded 5 rows, 3 crops. When we were doing the feasibility study, corn and beans were repeat crops because they were really, really popular among community interest. These are culturally relevant for the Latinx workers here and the Latinx residents here. So we wanted to make sure we had quite a bit of corn and beans. And then we transplanted 6 rows. Like I mentioned, Agape Nursery helped us in starting the seedlings in their own greenhouse, and then they delivered them for us to transplant, which was really, really nice of them. It saved us quite a bit of time and energy. And transplanting with the team of about 8 or so took maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours. A big thanks to our beginning farmer training program, students and staff for helping us out with that. And in order to keep the soil armored and protected from the intense heat and to prevent erosion and water loss, we laid ground cover in the form of sterile straw. And then once the plants were in the ground and the ground cover was on, we really just were watering, watching, and weeding at that point. We watered every other day for about 2 to 4 hours to give the roots time to kind of establish themselves within the soil. We were really selective whenever we were removing weeds, really only removing the weeds that were in direct competition with the crops to facilitate beneficial microbial interactions in the bare soil. And then we were also monitoring growth to plan for harvests. So these 3 pictures on the right, the top one I think is at 2 weeks before we even put the ground cover in. The middle one, I believe, is about 5 weeks in. And then this last one was taken 2 weeks ago at week 8. So you can really see how quickly these started to grow. Specifically, this is cucumber. I don't know if I mentioned that. Yeah, so after all of that was done, I just wanted to show you guys the land that we started on. This is our community center, the kind of makeshift office that we've been using. And this right here is all the land that we were using to create this farm. As you can see, the soil is very dry, very barren. I believe this was taken in November of 2023. I mean, just visually, you can see how nutrient starved this is. And I wanted to show you the stark difference between this and what we created. Can I? Yeah. This is drone footage that Nina took maybe a month ago or so. We're not going to watch the whole thing. I just wanted to, oh no. I just wanted to show you guys a little glimpse of how things are looking now. Really exciting work. Another kind of small side project we had with the AAES is we were doing an insect biodiversity study, and that's what these yellow sticky traps are for, right here and right here. That's still an ongoing thing. We actually just did our second round of trap collections, and we haven't identified any of the insects. But the primary purpose of this study was just to see what kinds of pests and what kinds of beneficial insects we're calling the AAES their home. Yeah, we don't have to watch the rest of that. But yeah. Um, Now the last kind of okay. The last thing I wanted to talk about, and I'll breeze through this really quickly, was the composting community engagement. We started a community composting program where we were collecting food waste from the elementary school. And that was going really well. We had about 10 to 15 pounds of food waste each week. Um, but eventually school was going to end as summer started, so we needed another source of food waste. I got to host a composting workshop for the residents at one of our cafecitos. We had a super brief lecture on soil composition. I got to tour them around the farm where I was showing them a proof of concept for how compost can help a pretty starved mineral soil. And then finally, the residents were able to try their own hand at composting, adding food scraps to the existing bin. And starting their own systems in their backyard or just adding to our collection bin. I'm doing my blog post around this so you can read more about that there. That was the community engagement portion of my capacity building. And other odd jobs I did around Allensworth, we planned for the fall festival. I guest lectured for the beginning farmer training program and helped build the greenhouse, participated in monthly food distributions, and I got a notification that we are running short on time. So I'm just going to leave it there and show some gratitude for everybody that helped me do everything. At Allensworth Progressive Association, the beginning farmer training program, of course, the GrizzlyCorps staff, admin, and all the fellows that I can really call my family at this point. All of our consultants from Understanding Ag and Lift Economy. And I'm so sorry I took a lot of time. And that's it.